Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Tom, and in today's video we're going to be going over Mortarion Part 3. Last time we saw Morty, he was in a bit of a pissy mood, so if you're not up to date with that, watch over here and you'll see exactly what I mean. I've been battling this tutorial and this model for a really long time, but to say that I'm losing is a little bit of an understatement. But that's all going to change today. I'm going to face my fears, I'm going to conquer this tutorial and finish this off once and for all. Well, maybe a little bit. We'll be a little bit closer because there'll be one more part, but we're close. We're close. To conquer this beast, the first thing I'm going to do is to go over all the trim around Mortarion's armor with Dubai Brown. After that, I'm going to be getting Balthazar Gold from Games Workshop and putting that over all of the trim. Now, this step is a bit tricky and it will take a while, so make sure you take your time because we've carefully airbrushed as well as carefully battle damaged all of his armor, and you don't want to ruin it now by accidentally getting some metallics on there. After I got the Balthazar Gold down, I got out some nickel oxide from Games Workshop as well, and I used this to pin wash around all of the little rivets, around all the little details across the trim of Mortarion's armor. When you're pin washing with nickel oxide, it's important that you're thinning down the paint just a bit because it is a very strong pigment, even though the paint is extremely thin. After pin washing with nickel oxide, what I did is I got my Baharoth blue as well as some pale sand from Vallejo. I mixed those two colours together to get about a 50-50 mix and highlighted the most extreme points with this colour. Alright, now it's time for the exciting bit. We're going to be working on his huge massive scythe as well as his pistol. Now, what I did here is I got to experiment with some metallics as well as some pigment powders and some washes, and this was really cool because it's the first time that I've ever done any sort of rusted weaponry this way. The first thing I did is I stippled brown all over the scythe to set down the base tones for the rest of the colours I'm going to put on over the top. After I stippled on the brown, the next step was to get my silver and stipple on some of the dark silver all over the entirety of the weapon. Now, it was looking pretty good at this point, but I really wanted to take it to the next level, so I needed to include some washes. After adding on the silver, the next step was for me to go and get some typhus corrosion, and I used this all over the scythe to build up some texture as well as some grit to make it look like the scythe has gathered up thousands of years of grime and dirt. During this step, I also thinned down the typhus corrosion so it wasn't as powerful. By thinning down the typhus corrosion, it really allowed me to be able to build up those layers of grime and dirt, as opposed to just putting down one thick coat and then losing all my detail straight away. After adding on the typhus corrosion, I went and got out some Gryph-hound Orange from Games Workshop as well as some Agrax Earthshade. I mixed these two colours together to create myself a rust wash to put all over the metallic areas. This was particularly important within the recesses of the scythe as well as around on the chainmail and things to really bring out the rust details across the entirety of the model. The next colour to go into the weapons after that was to get out some Jacaro Orange from Games Workshop, and I put this all over the weapon in the recesses as well as stippling it around just so I could get some more of those rust spots occurring. By nature, rust isn't really shiny or metallic, so what I did is I added some matte varnish to two colours. I added matte varnish to Avalanche Sunset as well as a mix of Mournfang Brown and Riser Rust. Now, what this did is it matted down the entirety of the surfaces of these metallic areas and really made them look, well, a bit more realistic, like they could exist within the real world. During this step, it was important that I wasn't applying too much of these paints. Now, I did apply them sort of everywhere and a bit ad hoc, but I was just trying to generate some more visual interest. So, if you were trying to create a rust effect of your own, just keep on adding and taking away some of the different colours to a point where you feel comfortable. After this step, I got some thrash metal from scale 75 and painted some straight lines off of the edge of the scythe to make it look like it was still sharp. After all, Mortarion's not going to use some dull blade to carve up his enemies. He's going to be making sure that that scythe is as sharp as it can be to clean through anyone who gets in his way on his path to glory. Now it's time for the second most daunting part of Mortarion. His big, beautiful, disgustingly gorgeous, revolting wings. After I painted his entire wings blue, I got out Xeri's purple from Games Workshop as well, and I used this to cover about 70% of the rest of the wings. After I covered the rest of the wings with Xeri's purple, I used Vallejo's Warlord purple and mixed it with some Xeri's purple to go over the last 10% of the wings, and then to finish off the very tips, I used pure Warlord purple to get this really smooth transition from blue to purple all the way up to a really bright, intense pink right at the very tips of his wings. To highlight Mortarion's wings, what I did is I got out some Emperor's Children from Games Workshop as well as some pale sand from Vallejo. The first highlight I did was Emperor's Children along the edges of these wings in some nice, thin, straight lines, making sure my paint is thinned down so I can build up these highlights gradually. After this step, I got out the pale sand from Vallejo and I mixed this in with the Emperor's Children to create an even brighter highlight colour to go over the top. This was the next highlight to go over each of the lines that I'd already placed on the edges of Mortarion's wings to really make them pop. The final highlight was a bit more pale sand again, almost pure pale sand, just at the very tips of each of those lines, right at the very edge of his wings, to really give it that definition. With the wings out of the way, we're just about done. Just one more really important area to go. The most intimidating part of the entire model, in my opinion, which is painting Mortarion's face. But I'm going to stop the video there for a second, because I actually didn't film painting his face. It was too hard to film trying to get the camera really close to the model and trying to paint at the same time. It was just too hard. What I am going to do is try and tell you exactly how I painted it as best as I can. So the first thing I did when I started painting his face was I made a lot of mistakes. And when I mean a lot, I mean I made a lot of mistakes. I tried adding a green ink over all of the pale skin tone that I added and that just looked completely wrong. I tried adding green to the pale skin tone and that just looked completely wrong and it just wasn't right, wasn't the right tone. And then after that, I finally nailed down on something, but I didn't film any of it, so that's of no help. But what I can remember is that I'd put down Flayed One Flesh first. That was the first base tone I'd laid down. After I'd laid down Flayed One Flesh, I got some Carroburg Crimson, and I made sure to put the Carroburg Crimson, the initial wash of Carroburg Crimson went all over his face. After that I went back with some Flayed One Flesh and picked out some of the highlight areas. The next highlight I did after that was Pallid Witch Flesh. This went all over the highest parts of Mortarion's face. I'm pretty sure I went back in with another wash of Carroburg Crimson, this time a little bit more targeted within all of the recesses across the crevices of his face. And there's quite a few, and it sticks out quite a lot, which is pretty awesome when you're trying to get a wash in there. It really sets out that contrast between the dark crevices and the highlighted flesh. All that was left to do after I'd painted the flesh of his face was to paint in his eyes. Now to do this, what I did first is I actually painted in a little bit of a blue-grey over his entire eyeball, because the whites of our eyes aren't really truly white, they're more of a light blue-grey. To make it look like he had some cataracts in his eyes because, you know, he's the Lord of Plagues, I mixed in some grey with some blue, as well as a little bit of white to make a really nice light grey-blue tone to paint in those really fine little small cataracts within his eyeballs. Now, if you've already got yourself a light blue sort of grey colour, you could just use that straight out of the pot. Something like Fenrisian grey, maybe with a little bit of white from Games Workshop. but I don't quite remember exactly what paints I used and in what ratio. You'll just sort of have to go off my word for this one. His face painted, there was only one thing left to do, and that was to paint the piping detail around Mortarion's armour. I started off with Cantor Blue from Games Workshop, making sure that I got a nice smooth and consistent coat. After that, I highlighted it with Lothern Blue first, and then I went over with Baharoth Blue and a smaller, finer highlight over the top to finish it off. And with that all done, here's Mortarion as he stands now. This video and this process has taken a really long time, so I'd really appreciate if you guys could like, subscribe. If you haven't checked out parts 1 or 2 yet, please go and check out parts 1 and 2. That'll fill you in a whole heap of detail about how I've wet blended the cape, how I've painted all of the battle damage across his armour, and all the other details across the entirety of the model. I really hope you guys got something out of this video or took something away, and I'll see you guys on the tabletop.